We say often in recovery that forgiveness is a process. But what does that process look like? And how might we get hung up in the process and get stuck as we're trying to see through and live out forgiveness in our recovery?
Recovery can be hard, but it's worth it. There is hope knowing we can find healing one step at a time with Jesus and healthy community. Whether you're struggling with a hurt or a hang-up or a habit, you're not alone. During this podcast, we share real stories, practical tools, and powerful truths that inspire you to keep moving forward. No matter where you are on your journey, there's hope ahead. So stick with us as we walk this path together through Celebrate Recovery.
Well, hey, welcome back to Hope in Recovery, a Fellowship Celebrate Recovery podcast where we talk life change stories and recovery conversations to help keep us moving closer to the healing, hope, and purpose that Jesus gives us on our road to recovery. And super grateful for the chance to be here and connect as we've been having these podcasts, and appreciate you guys being here and watching on whatever platform it is you're watching on, whether it's Spotify or YouTube, or if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're at. We're grateful that you're here. Excited about today's conversation because it's kind of an extension of our last conversation last week, but it's digging into a little bit more forgiveness. What is it? What does the process look like, and how might we get hung up in the process? But as always, if you're getting something out of these conversations, hey, please, drop us a line. Let us know that you're liking them. And if you have ideas, suggestions, reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. cr@fellowshipnwa.org. But let me introduce myself and we'll jump into this week's conversation. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus. I struggle with anxiety and depression, sexual addiction, and grief. And my name is Andy, and I've got the great privilege of being able to be on staff with our Celebrate Recovery team here at Fellowship Bible Church, and grateful for to be a part of this ministry of both Fellowship Rogers and Fellowship Fayetteville. And so thank you for listening and being a part of this today. So last week we just talked a little bit about what is forgiveness, lasting healing and long-term recovery. It's not possible if we allow bitterness and resentment to rule our hearts, and if we harbor that in our life. There's a reason why Principle 6 is such a really vital part of this recovery process. And, one of the things that we talked about last week, we talked about some things that forgiveness is not, but one of the things that we ended with is the reality that forgiveness is a choice. It's a choice to release our offender over to Jesus and to ask God to heal and carry these burdens and wounds that we've been carrying for so long. I love what it says in Galatians. It's Galatians 2:20. It says, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but he lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. And I love that particular passage. It's so powerful. And one of the things that I love so much about it is this reality that, I have been crucified with Christ and I no longer live, but he lives with me. When we come to place our hope, faith, and trust in Jesus and submit to him as our higher power, it is as if our old self has been nailed to the cross with Jesus. And what was nailed to the cross? Well, why did Jesus die? Jesus died for the weight of sin in this world, both the actions that I have committed, but he also died to carry the burden of the actions that have been committed against me. Jesus carries all of the weight of the pain of sin in our life. And I think one of the most important parts of my recovery is learning to let Jesus in to the burdens and the bitterness and resentment that I was harboring so that I could experience freedom. One of the lies that bitterness and resentment has is that if I just hold on to this bitterness, if I nurse this bitterness, then it's going to give me some sense of control over the wound. But the reality is that bitterness is not something that we can hold on to if we're wanting to live in lasting freedom. And that's such a hard thing because many of us that have been listening to this have been wounded and hurt in really, really deep ways. And so actually sometimes there might be some of you hearing me say that, and you might be thinking, Andy, you don't know what I've gone through. You don't know the pain that I've carried. And I know statistically, just people listening to this and watching this, there's a lot of us that have endured abuse. There's a lot of us that have endured betrayal. For many of us, the people closest to us are the ones that have wounded us in the biggest ways. And I just want to say, for what it's worth, I'm so sorry that you've endured those wounds. And I hate that that's happened. This world is such a broken place. And that is never more true in evidence than when we reflect on the wounds we've taken in this life. But we do know that forgiveness it's not a feeling. It's not us letting somebody off the hook. It's not weakness. Forgiveness is a necessary step in freedom. And it is an act of obedience when it comes to following Jesus. Jesus commanded us to forgive. And what I love whenever you read the Bible, there's never a point where God says, okay, you can harbor that bitterness. Now, we talked about this last week, but in Ephesians 4, it says, get rid of all bitterness and rage and anger and brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. But forgive one another, just as in Christ Jesus you have been forgiven. And I think it's important in that verse because it says, get rid of all anger. There is such thing as righteous anger, and it's okay to feel that. What it's telling us is that we don't want to be driven and ruled by anger in our life. And we don't want to be driven and ruled by unhealthy anger. It is important to feel our anger, and we'll talk about that in this conversation. But we're not called to be ruled and driven by our anger. It's, God gave us our emotions. He gave us the ability to feel pain, to feel anger, to feel indignant, not to be ruled by it, but it's information. It's information for us to ask, hey, what does this mean in God? How are you wanting to speak into my heart and life right now? And so we talked about how forgiveness is a choice. It is a choice to follow in Jesus' footsteps and forgive somebody. But it's a choice followed by a process. The prayer that we so often pray around forgiveness is, Lord, help me to want one day to maybe be curious about possibly forgiving somebody. And that's not a bad prayer, but I think it's an incomplete prayer. Yes, we want the willingness to forgive. But I think a better prayer to pray is, God, I am resolving to forgive. I choose to forgive this person, but I need your help with the process. God, would you help me with the process? And so in today's conversation, I want to trace out 3 different paths surrounding the wounds in our life that we can take. And I've adapted this from a book called Forgiving What You'll Never Forget by a guy named Dr. David Stoop. I think it's a really great book on forgiveness. There's not everything in it that I agree with, but I think he traces out these three paths, and I think they're really, really good. And I've adapted them a little bit for our Celebrate Recovery context. But I think it's really important when it comes to the process of forgiveness, we can get hung up in the process, and it can actually lead us to continuing to live in denial or live in our bitterness. And so let me just talk through these paths with us for our time together. So the first path that we can take when we've been wounded is the path of bitterness. And that just sounds like such a fun path. And I just want to say none of us chooses intentionally the path of bitterness, but this is what it looks like. So an offense occurs, which means we all experience hurt, and with it, we experience the injustice and the righteous anger that comes when we're wounded in really, really serious ways. So an offense occurs and we experience hurt. And when we experience hurt in our life, and we've probably seen this in our recovery, all of us long to be seen. You know, the most important thing for us in our pain isn't necessarily that the pain is fixed, but the pain needs to be witnessed. The pain needs to be witnessed and organized for it to heal. And so naturally we get this because when we're wounded and we experience hurt, we start to tell and retell the event. We bring people in, we bring people closest to us, and we let them know what happened. And you know what? None of that is actually a bad thing. Those first three things, it's not bad that we bring people into our pain. In fact, that's one of the most important things that we learn within this process of recovery is that we have to be honest about the wound. We have to bring another brother or sister. We have to bring Jesus into that place. But after the offense occurs and we experience hurt and we tell and retell the event, we have a choice to make. And that choice in the path of bitterness is that we choose to play this accuse and excusing game. It's this choice where we live in anger and try to take justice and healing into our own hands. And we can find ourselves in this place where we're bouncing between accusing and condemning our offender for the pain that they caused, while simultaneously trying to, for some reason or another, maybe rationalize or excuse away why the things happened. And part of that is because our brain is trying to make sense of the wound. It's always trying to organize meaning. But then after we get into this accusing and excusing cycle, and I think we've all probably either been there or been around people where it's like, man, like, I know that hurt, but it seems like you're getting stuck in this. And then we start to obsess about the event, where we scour social media pages, we read and reread the text messages, and then our pain becomes our life, and it becomes way too risky to challenge the narrative of that pain. And then in that place, we can even like seek revenge or repayment. We want some sort of recompense for what happened to us. And it's not saying that we don't deserve recompense, but the problem is we try to get it under our own strength. And ultimately, we can get in this place where we get so surrounded by our pain and bitterness that we isolate and withdraw. Anybody that challenges the narrative, we just push them away. And we just crystallize into this place of bitterness. And bitterness is such an easy thing. It's such a comfortable thing to fall into. It feels very justifiable, where we feel like I've got the right to be angry. I've earned the right to be bitter. And the reality is like, it's hard to argue with that. Yeah, because of what you've experienced. Yeah, you've got every reason to be upset and bitter. What you went through was wrong. Somebody sinned against you. It hurt really deeply. But here's the thing, bitterness and resentment are far easier than forgiveness. And what I've seen in my life is that the bitterness in my life was kind of a twisted way to find control. It's that I can't change the situation, I can't change the hurt, but I can be angry about it. And that anger is energizing and it makes me feel like I'm doing something. But bitterness is always going to hijack our healing. Bitterness is an emotional cancer that steals our energy, it destroys our relationships, and it keeps us stuck in our pain. We can become addicted to the bitterness in our life. And here's the thing, though, is like if you find yourself listening to this and you're like, man, I think I've become addicted to bitterness, you don't have to stay in that place. And it makes sense how you got there. There's really good reasons why. But is living in the addiction to bitterness and resentment, is that really sound like the abundant life that Jesus has called us to? We can make a different choice. We can choose at any point to enter into healing. Now, we're coming up against our break right now, so I want to go ahead and head to our break real quick. But when we come back, we'll talk about the second path that we can deal with, or that we can step into when it comes to our wounds.
Hey friends! A lot of people find the process of starting recovery scary because they aren't sure how to begin or what to expect. The easiest way to get started is simply to get started. Just take that next right step and go to a CR meeting. Every Friday night, we have our Celebrate Recovery meetings at Fellowship Fayetteville and Fellowship Rogers. At 6 p.m., we have a great meal for connection with other recovery brothers and sisters. Then we meet for large group at 7 p.m., followed by open share groups at 8. Same schedule on both campuses, different teachers, different worship teams, but the same great experience. We'd love for you to join us this Friday night. It's never too late to start or start over again. For more information, go to fellowshipcr.org.
All right, we are back talking about the process of forgiveness and what does that look like. And there's a couple ways that we can get hung up in the process. One of them is choosing bitterness and kind of buying into the narrative of our pain rather than releasing it to God and trying to control it. And this is probably a much more common way that we deal with our pain. But there is a second path that maybe is probably talked about less, but it is just as damaging. And it's the path of denial. Now, what you'll notice is that it starts the same way as the path of bitterness. There's an offense that occurs, we experience hurt, and we tell or retell the story a little bit. But we make a choice, and maybe we don't tell the story a whole lot. Actually, maybe sometimes we don't tell the story at all. But we make a choice to slip into denial or self-blame. This is where we choose to downplay or minimize the pain. And oftentimes we can just assume the fullness of the blame. And it's kind of, we talked about it before the break, but it's kind of our brain trying to make sense of the hurt. I got hurt so bad. This was so awful. So surely I must have done something to deserve this. But ultimately, we refuse to acknowledge the pain. We refuse to touch the pain. We refuse to honor it, which means we refuse to give it the proper weight it deserves. And we become just numb. We freeze and shut down our emotions. And then we disconnect ourselves from that. And what ultimately happens is we can wall off a part of our heart. And as we wall off that part of our heart, it starts to slowly die a little bit. And it robs us a little bit of the joy that we were made for in this life. And I think if I can be honest with you guys, which I think I can with my forever family, I think this is probably my go-to path when I'm hurt. I think my first reaction when I'm hurt is, oh, this was my fault. And I think like one of the reasons why, and it's a good question to ask, if you notice that, asking, hey, when was the first time you noticed this pattern crop up in your life? And I think the reason why is because when I think about pain happening growing up in my family of origin, it was a lot of times the pain was kind of tamped down. Extreme sadness or anxiety or frustration or woundedness wasn't always handled super well. And sometimes it was kind of given the idea of like, whoa, 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 whoa. That pain, that emotion, that reaction's not welcome here. And so you need to temper that down a little bit. And what I've realized is pain that I repress stays frozen and it turns inward. And oftentimes it leads to this numbness of depression in my life. And I'm not allowed to express what's going on. And so I depress everything that I'm feeling. And it feels really, really numb. You know, this is also a really common path if we were hurt deeply by a family member or a close friend. You may have learned, you know, kind of like I was taught in my family, that if somebody hurt you, somebody in your family hurt you, it's not forgiving to say that they hurt you. It's not loving them well. We need to forgive and forget, you know, one of those lies we talked about last time, because honesty isn't loving. And I love this. This is a quote from Jay Stringer. He's a author and a Christian therapist. He wrote a great book called Unwanted. And he talks about an interesting observation in the dynamic between honor and honesty. He says this, that many families and faith communities have embraced the lie that if we're honest, we could not truly honor, or that if we honored somebody, it would certainly come at the cost of honesty. And I think that sums up my family dynamic in some ways pretty well. That if I am honest about the pain that somebody else has caused me in my family or my church community, that's not honoring them well. That's not kind. That's not loving. But the other choice is just deny that it happened. We deny reality. Could it be the case, though, and I had to realize this, that honestly bringing my pain out into the light, it actually allows me to fully honor and love my family the way that Jesus calls me to. We talk about this in the recovery process, but Jeremiah 6:14, it reminds us that we can't heal a wound by saying that it's not there. When I deny the pain, I can't release the pain, which means I can't forgive the pain. And that's always going to hinder my ability to love and receive love from others, especially in my closest relationship. We got to make sure that we bring our pain out into the light for it to heal. Now, the last path, this is the positive path. It's the path of forgiveness. But I think notice how similar it is to the others. So first off, an offense occurs, we experience hurt, and then we tell and retell the event. But then we make a different choice. We make the choice to choose and forgive rather than choosing to hold on and try and accomplish justice and healing in our own strength and power. We choose to release our offender to Jesus and acknowledge the pain that's going on in our life. And so we make the choice to forgive, and in doing so, we bring others into the space with us to help us organize the wound well. We want to organize the wound that has happened in our life. We truthfully organize the hurt. And we have to do that in the context of community. Otherwise, our bitterness and our hurt can kind of shape our lens. And we do this so well in the inventory process and Celebrate Recovery. That's why it's so important to share your inventory with your sponsor or a close accountability partner, because they can act as a sounding board in the hurt in there. You know, forgiveness is a choice that only I can make, but it's not something I can live out in isolation. And so with that as well, you know, I do want to say, like, when we seek to truthfully organize the hurt, when it comes specifically to abuse, in Celebrate Recovery, we say all the time that if you've been a victim of abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, spiritual abuse, one, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that happened. That, like, my heart hurts with you. You are not responsible for what happened to you. And I want you to hear that loud and clear. You are not responsible at all for the action committed against you. And in the same breath, I do want to say this. Even though you're not responsible for what happened to you, we are responsible for what we do with the pain. I am responsible for how I live in light of that pain. You see, the reality is that we're never going to find peace from our perpetrator until we're able to forgive that person. Forgiveness doesn't excuse the act, but rather forgiveness allows us to be released from the power that act has over us. But we have to be willing to enter into that process. And so as we truthfully organize the hurt, here's the other thing that we do. We grieve. Forgiveness is never divorced from grieving. You see, we have to grieve the hard things that have happened to us if we ever want to move forward. And a helpful way to think through grief is that it's in 4 stages. And the 4 stages are this: denial, anger, sadness, acceptance. So denial, anger, and protest. We experience sadness or resignation even in that too. And then finally acceptance. And it's helpful to think through that, denial and acceptance are bookends of the process. And oftentimes we ping pong between anger and sadness a lot of the time. And I found that really interesting the first time that I saw that because, anger is a part of grief. Anger is a harder emotion for me. It was a hard emotion for my family growing up. And I was kind of taught that even though anger can be used as a weapon, I was taught that anger was only a weapon, but really it's a God-given emotion to help us understand, to try and give voice, honestly, to some pain that we're feeling in our life. And, I realized that if I have a shallow ability to grieve, and I have a shallow ability to experience and honor healthy anger in my life, it's going to shortchange my healing because I'm only gonna have an incomplete expression of my pain, which is going to be shallow grief, shallow forgiveness, and a shallow ability to step into freedom and healing. It's so important for us to grieve. John Eldredge says this. He says it's so important for each of us to grieve our wound. It's the only honest thing that we do, for in grieving, we actually admit truth, that we were hurt by someone that we loved, we lost something dear, and it hurt us. He goes on to say that tears are healing because they help to open and cleanse the wound. And I love that. And so as we grieve the wound, then we make the choice to forgive. We enter into releasing that to our higher power. And sometimes we might do that through a letter. This is like the act of it. We might do that in a letter that we never send and we read to our sponsor and then burn it afterwards. I love doing that because I like playing with fire. Just, I'll call my sponsor on that later. But seriously, you can write a letter and burn it. You can, go to it. Maybe they've passed and maybe you're going to a gravestone and you're having a conversation. Maybe you're doing the empty chair technique. But we're having that expression of forgiveness where we are choosing to hand that person over to Jesus. Now, after we forgive, we then consider reconciliation. Remember, reconciliation can follow forgiveness, but it doesn't always. And as we consider reconciliation, we also ask God to grow our capacity to trust again. Wounds always impact our ability to trust other people. And it's important to challenge those things that keep us stuck, because if we're not able to trust people, we're not going to be able to let people fully in, which means we're not going to be fully known. And we can only be fully loved to the extent that we're fully known. So all of that to say, and I know there's been so much that we've just packed into this time, Uh, I want to say this. I know that understanding these paths, the path of bitterness, the path of denial, the path of forgiveness, it doesn't make forgiveness any easier. It certainly doesn't make it any more fun. It doesn't make it any more fair. But why do we enter into forgiveness? We forgive because God first forgave us. There are serious wounds that we've endured in this life. And God is bigger than every one of those wounds. It may not feel like it right now. You may not believe that. You may not like me for saying that. That's okay. But God is bigger than any wounds that we're carrying. The question is am I going to let him into those wounds? Jesus tells us in Matthew 11:28, come to me, all of you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon me. Learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. Jesus invites us that no matter what the wound is, we can come to him. He wants to carry that for us. He wants us to be able to walk and live this life unencumbered. I love what it says in Hebrews 12. It says, that we run this race. Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and run this race with perseverance towards Jesus. We're called to throw off all the sin that entangles us and the sin that so easily hinders us, and everything else that entangles us, everything that hinders. And that includes the wounds that we've carried in this life. And Jesus wants to help us toss those wounds off and then heal them so that we can run this race the way that he designed us to. And I know it's a hard thing, and I know it's a process. And, if you're listening to this today and you're like, I don't know if I can do this, could you at least be curious to the possibility that maybe one day you could? Maybe God is so faithful that the wounds we're carrying, even that wound, Jesus is big enough to heal. I've seen him do it in my life time and time again. I've seen him do it in countless others' lives time and time again. You're not alone in your pain. And Jesus wants to meet you in that place. And if you need a safe place where you can let him into that spot, every single Friday night here at Celebrate Recovery at Fellowship Rogers and Fellowship Fayetteville, we would love to see you there. 7 o'clock is when our service starts, and we've got a forever family of people that want to walk alongside you towards Jesus as we learn to hand our wounds over to him. With that said, we love you, forever family. Thanks for spending time with us today, and we'll see you next time.